The 1870 census of manufacturers contains fuel consumption records for more than 42,000 industrial establishments across the United States. Those records confirm, in the government's own tabulation, that firewood consumption in America peaked in that precise year and then collapsed. Not gradually, not over a generation. Within a single decade, the energy system that an entire civilization had organized itself around became statistically marginal. That kind of collapse does not happen by accident, and it does not happen unless something was ready to replace it, something that was already built, already operational, and that nobody in the official record has adequately explained. The standard account of this transition is straightforward. America burned wood, forests were depleting, coal was cheaper, the market adjusted. That narrative is tidy, and it appears in every standard energy history. But here is what the standard account leaves out. Across the decades before 1870, in government buildings, in textile mills, in medical colleges, in civic institutions, a sophisticated network of centralized heating systems had already been installed, patented, and deployed. Systems that did not depend on wood. Systems that do not appear in the popular memory of 19th century America. Systems whose patent models currently sit in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, catalogued, accessible, and almost entirely unexamined by the historians who are supposed to be writing this story. The transition that 1870 marks was not a beginning. The evidence suggests it was an ending. The first piece of evidence is the oldest. In 1816, the Massachusetts Medical College in Boston became the first large institutional building in America to be centrally heated, not by fireplaces, not by individual wood stoves in each room, by a gravity-fed hot air system, a single heat source distributing warmth through a structure. This is documented in the historical record of residential and institutional heating compiled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The year is 1816. That is not the industrial era. That was 7 years before the Erie Canal opened, and yet the capability to heat a building from a central source without filling it with chimneys and fireplaces was already operational. Then came 1841. In that year, Joseph Nason installed America's first documented hot water central heating system inside a Massachusetts textile mill. In the same period, the first United States patents for cast iron radiator technology were filed. The development and mass production of cast iron heating radiators is documented by Tuscan Foundry and Heritage Radiators as an American invention with patents dating from around 1841. These were not theoretical designs. These were physical objects being manufactured and installed in American buildings 30 years before the 1870 census captured what people were supposedly burning. The second case is harder to dismiss. On February 22, 1847, the completed United States Custom House in Boston entered service. According to the records preserved by the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating and Air Conditioning Engineers, a forced air heating system had been installed in a U.S. government custom house in Boston by that year, a government building designed to function, heated by forced air rather than open combustion. The document that records this is not a conspiracy theory. It is an institutional timeline maintained by the professional body that regulates the heating engineering industry today. What happened next is documented but rarely mentioned together with the events above. Between July 13, 1869 and February 22, 1870, Benjamin Franklin Sturtevant of Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, filed a sequence of patents that described, in precise mechanical detail, a complete forced air heating and ventilating apparatus. His system used a steam-producing boiler driving a centrifugal fan wheel to circulate heated air through ductwork. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History holds his physical patent models. They are made of brass and tin. The catalog entry is specific. They represent the central ductwork, heat exchanger, and steam condenser of Sturtevant's patented system. His company would go on to heat more than 500 representative buildings using this technology. The Smithsonian has had his models since the institution began acquiring patent records. They have never been the subject of a public exhibit about American heating history. Then came 1870. The 9th census surveyed 42,000 manufacturing establishments and compiled what the Census Bureau itself described as the most comprehensive fuel consumption statistics the government had ever attempted. The results recorded that total firewood consumption peaked in that year. From 1800 to 1870, wood had represented nearly 100% of American energy use. After 1870, that share fell precipitously. An NBR working paper titled Firewood in the American Economy 1700 to 2010 confirms this peak in precise language. The census recorded the transition. It did not record what had already been operating in the buildings that were never relying on firewood to begin with. If centralized forced air systems, hot water heating, and steam distribution were patented and installed in American institutional buildings as early as 1816, and if the Smithsonian holds physical evidence of this in its own collection, then why does the standard historical account describe pre-1870 America as a civilization dependent entirely on open fireplaces and wood stoves? That is the first question. The second is structural. The 42,000 establishments surveyed in the 1870 census reported their fuel sources because census enumerators asked them to. But the census itself acknowledged, in the notes of its methodology, that fuel consumption records were impractical to fully verify, and that the figures relied substantially on what manufacturers reported voluntarily. What happens to a technology that produces no combustion residue, requires no wood delivery, and leaves no soot trail when a census enumerator asks what fuel is being consumed? The third question is architectural. If you visit the monumental civic buildings constructed in American cities between 1830 and 1870, the courthouses, the custom houses, the institutional halls, the medical colleges, and you calculate the square footage against the number and size of fireplaces visible in their plans, the mathematics of combustion heating do not resolve. The square footage exceeds what any documented array of fireplaces could have maintained survivable temperatures through a northern winter. No official architectural history has addressed this measurement gap directly, but the question that kept returning was not how these buildings were heated, it was why the answer was so difficult to find. One anomaly is an anomaly. A centralized heating system in a medical college in 1816 could be an exceptional case, an unusually forward-thinking institution, a one-time engineering experiment. Two anomalies are harder to dismiss. A forced air system in a federal government building in 1847, with its patent models held by the Smithsonian, strains the one-time exception argument. Three anomalies become something else entirely. A full sequence of patents for industrial forced air heating filed in 1869 and 1870, a physical technology with hundreds of documented installations, and a census that captures the precise year when the old energy order collapsed. These three data points describe a pattern, not a series of isolated incidents. The pattern is this. A sophisticated, centralized heating infrastructure existed in America before the official energy transition. It was documented, it was patented, it was installed in government and institutional buildings. And when the historical record was consolidated, through census statistics, through official energy histories, through museum narratives, that infrastructure was framed as rare, exceptional, and experimental rather than as the operating norm of pre-industrial American architecture. This pattern reproduces itself across three separate historical contexts. In institutional buildings, early steam and forced air systems were installed and then treated as curiosities rather than precursors. In the patent record, the most significant heating technology patents of the mid-19th century are held by the Smithsonian in physical form and discussed nowhere in the public historical narrative. And in the architectural record, buildings whose square footage cannot be reconciled with wood combustion heating continue to be described in official literature as wood-heated structures without anyone performing the thermal calculation. Three different contexts, three different institutions, three different time periods. The same outcome. The record of what was actually happening inside those buildings before 1870 has been compressed into a single, simple story about wood. I am not calling that story a fabrication. I am describing something more specific. The evidence suggests it is a selection. Someone chose which facts the official record would carry forward. And the facts they left behind are still there, in brass and tin, in a cabinet in Washington. These are not my documents. They are theirs. Written by the people who did the classifying, preserved in their own handwriting, filed under their own catalog numbers. The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History holds Sturpant's 1870 patent models under accession number NMH 846936. The description reads, a forced air heating system consisting of a steam-producing boiler, a steam engine to drive a centrifugal wheel fan for circulating air. This is in the public catalog. Any researcher can access it. And yet in every standard account of how Americans heated their buildings before the modern era, this object, this brass and tin model sitting in a federal institution, is invisible. Now consider what happened on September 24, 1877. A fire tore through the north and west halls of the United States Patent Office in Washington. Wikipedia's documentation of the event is precise. Approximately 80,000 patent models were burned or damaged. Approximately 600,000 copy drawings were destroyed. This was not the first time. In December 1836, a fire at the Patent Office had already destroyed nearly 10,000 original X patents and approximately 7,000 models. 100 years of American technological development reduced to ash in a single night. The records confirm that the Patent Office fires of 1836 and 1870 together erased more physical technological history than any other single sequence of institutional events in American history. The September 1877 fire occurred 2 months before Birdsell Holley incorporated the Holley Steam Combination Company in Lockport, New York, the venture that would be officially designated the first commercial district steam heating system in American history. The technology that the official record would go on to celebrate as a novel achievement of the 1877 era had its historical antecedents burned in a patent office 2 months before the company was incorporated. I am not claiming the fire was deliberate. I am describing a coincidence so precise in its timing that no energy history I have examined has noted it. The human cost of what burned in those 2 fires is not abstract. It is the cost of losing the documentation of what an earlier generation of American builders and engineers already knew, of having that knowledge officially restarted from a later baseline, as if the decades before 1870 had produced nothing worth preserving. The buildings still stand. Their heating systems do not appear in the record. There is a principle operating beneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with conspiracy. It has to do with how institutional records are curated, what they are organized to show, and what they are permitted to leave out. The 1870 census is the most comprehensive fuel survey the United States government had ever attempted. It captured what was reported. It could not capture what was never asked. And the question of whether buildings that predated the coal era were heated by means that left no combustion record was never asked, not by the census enumerators, not by the energy historians who followed them, and not by the architectural preservation community that now documents those same buildings as relics of a wood-burning civilization. What this means for the present is not theoretical. Every time a heating engineer describes the 20th century invention of heat recovery ventilation, they are describing something that McGill University researchers traced backward in 2023 to a hospital built in 1893 in Montreal, and from there to the original centre block of Canada's Parliament. The researchers published their findings in a peer-reviewed journal and noted explicitly that many scholars had assumed heat recovery was a 20th century innovation. It was not. It had simply been forgotten. That is what institutional forgetting looks like from the inside, not a dramatic act of suppression. A quiet administrative failure to carry a fact forward, repeated across enough institutions, across enough decades, until the fact no longer appears in any current reference and the people who might have corrected the record are gone. The technology existed. The documents confirm it. The buildings still stand. And the story we tell about them is the story someone decided to record in 1870, not the story the buildings themselves describe. In 1876, Birdsell Holley ran an underground steam pipe from his home in Lockport, New York, to a boiler 500 feet away. 1 year later, he incorporated a company around it, and it was called the first of its kind. The heating historians do not ask what he had already seen. They do not ask where the idea came from in a man who had spent his career working with pressurized water systems and municipal infrastructure. They record the 1877 date and they begin the story there. Somewhere between the Massachusetts Medical College in 1816 and the Lockport Steam Company in 1877, 60 years of American heating technology passed through the Patent Office twice and burned twice. The 42,000 records from the 1870 census tell you what was being reported as fuel. They do not tell you what was already in the walls. There are buildings from this period still standing in cities across the northeastern United States. Their fireplace capacity has never been formally measured against their square footage. Their basement infrastructure has never been fully mapped. Their architects, in many cases trained in Europe. in traditions that included hypercourse-derived radiant systems and thermosiphon ventilation going back centuries. One of those buildings still operates. Everything that was supposed to explain how it was heated is gone. Nobody is asked what it was actually built to do.